Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Better Call Saul Season 5, Episode 3, The Guy for This. And this video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Better Call Saul, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Better Call Saul up to Season 5, Episode 3. If you haven't seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, this was not a bad episode, not by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't think it was quite as good as the first two, and that's actually kind of typical for a season of Better Call Saul. Usually they start strong with the first two episodes, and then episode 3, and then it usually gets into a bit of a lull, where it's kind of just setting things up and is really slow paced. But then again, as I always say every time this happens, there's nothing wrong with that because it's a piece of the puzzle. It fits, helps set everything up, and helps tell the overall story. It's just watching it week to week can be a bit frustrating because it's a bit slow, and I really want to see where they're going with this because they're so damn good at it. And I will say, if you watch my reviews for the other show, I covered The Expanse. I complained about because The Expanse was released weekly for the first 3 seasons, but then it got canceled and Sci-Fi picked up on Amazon. Amazon dropped it all at once, and I complained about that because I thought I preferred to consume the show on a week-to-week basis because then I can analyze it, talk about it, have the community experience, and dropping it all at once seems to diminish the whole experience for me. I actually feel the exact opposite with Better Call Saul. I actually wish that this was dropped all at once. Because I think this show more than any other, it feels, because it's such an incredibly slow burn, and again, there's nothing wrong with that, it's still an amazing show, but it is a slow burn, and because it's a slow burn, I feel like each episode is it's not really standalone. Even something like The Expanse, even though that is telling one story over an entire season, each episode still has a sort of self-contained feeling to it, even though it's part of a larger whole. Whereas Better Call Saul, sure there's themes within each episode, and it does have some self-containedness to it. Still, it feels like every episode's I would compare it more to a scene in the movie. It feels more like watching a scene from a movie, stopping, waiting a week, and then watching the next scene, stopping and waiting a week, more so than any other show, any other serialized show, even Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones or Expanse or what have you. I think Better Call Saul, more than any other show, I feel like really would benefit from a binge. If I had the willpower, I could not watch it week to week and wait till the whole season's finished and watch it all at once. I did this with Westworld, but I don't have the fucking patience for that because I love the show too much, and there's no way I'd have the willpower to wait that long to watch it, so I kind of do it to myself. But this show in particular, I do wish was dropped all at once, and so this, because I so want to see what happens next because they're so good at hooking you in. But I do think that this particular episode, if I am judging it on an individual basis, was a bit weaker than the first two, but again contributes to the whole. Now, so yeah, the opening scene, although I didn't like at all, to be honest, it seems a bit pretentious. And this is something that, Breaking Bad did this a little bit. I think Better Call Saul does this a lot more. And I think this is actually one of the worst examples of that. Where they have a really, artsy, really well shot, cinematic, well edited, sequence that's mostly just irrelevant in there to show off, ooh, isn't this all artsy? Now, I know I'm talking about, of course, the ants climbing over the ice cream. It's completely irrelevant. It adds nothing. And while I was watching, I was like, this is a waste of time. It adds absolutely nothing to the story. And if I'm going to be honest, I think, even though, I love Better Call Saul. I think it's one of the best shows ever made. But I do think that there is possible to cut out maybe 20% of the entire show and it still be as good, if not better, because a lot of it's just kind of there. I wouldn't really call it filler. It's more of, oh, look at how artsy we are. And it helps build the character set to seem sure, but I think the characters are sort of built enough. They sometimes take a bit too much time. This scene in particular it doesn't build any characters or anything. Now, I know some people might argue, oh, it's a metaphor because the ants crying over the ice cream is kind of like, Saul, Jimmy McGill trying to think he has the precious money, but it actually ends up being bad for him, or it's about how things decay and nothing stays good, or anything. Like, I'm sure people will come up with all these things what a metaphor is. I still say, nah. I still think it's pretentious, no matter what metaphor you think it's for. I think it's a waste of time. And maybe not pretentious, like, I think I'm being maybe a bit too harsh on it. Like, I didn't totally hate it and think, oh, this sucks. But I do think it was unnecessary. I do think that the episode and the show overall would have been better without it. I didn't think it ruined anything. And, oh, this episode sucks because this scene was horrible. Nothing like that. It's just, do we need this? No, I don't think we do. But even though they do try to tie it in at the end of the episode, and again, people are like, oh, it's a metaphor. He sees the ice cream. No, I think that's a bit pretentious. I'm sorry. But anyway, the rest of the episode I actually did really like, as I said. There's a lot of great stuff in here. So, yeah, let's start with Saul Goodman, Jimmy McGill, of course, but now I can't call him Saul Goodman because he's going by Saul. Yeah, it's he's kind of tied into a lot of the other characters and character arcs because we see him get picked up by Lalo. Now, this is something, as I said before, this is season 5 is finally getting into what I was expecting to see in season 1. I didn't realize at the time that this show would be such a slow burn because it kind of teased this. Because they had Saul meet with Tuco, and then they had Nacho try to manipulate him. And I thought, ooh, Nacho's kind of manipulate him. This is how he's going to become involved in this criminal underworld and have all these connections and know the cartel and stuff like that. But no, it wasn't. It turned out nothing really came of that. And then season 2, 3, and mostly 4 pretty much Saul had no contact with Nacho or the cartel or anything. So, and they went off in a completely different... He had to go through his character arc of, because at first, in the first season, he was a good person. He was a good lawyer. He wanted to be a good lawyer. He wanted to emulate his brother. And so he had to go through a character arc where he lost that sense of innocence, that sense of hope, and became the sleazy lawyer that he is. So we did get up to that point, but of course he's not all gone yet. As we see in this episode, he is still just as afraid and just as trepidatious of dealing with the cartel that he was in season 1. He still has that feeling, but he's been through the character arc since season 1 where he's no longer trying to be an upstanding good lawyer. He's accepted that, well, society doesn't want him. Fuck society. I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want and become this sleazy lawyer. So I think you did need that character arc, and that's something I didn't realize when I was watching season 1. But of course it's very clear now. But I still think waiting all the way to season 5 was still maybe a bit too long in my opinion. But don't get me wrong, I love the show to fucking death. Anyway, so we're finally getting that now with Lalo coming up to Saul and trying to... Now, I mentioned in the previous episode that it was Lalo's idea to get Saul, which surprised me because I didn't think, how the hell would Lalo know Saul? Because I was just thinking that Nacho would know him from the experience that he had. But I forgot all about the Tuco thing. And of course, we learned that's how Lalo knows him, because Tuco's his cousin, and he heard from him about how he talked Tuco down from skinning these guys alive and killing them. And I love how he's like, oh, Lalo's talking to Saul. He's like, oh, they walked out of there fine. And then Saul's like, actually, they were wheeled out because Tuco broke their legs. But still, he has a good point and he caught on to this, that Saul has to be amazing at convincing people to do things if he was able to talk Tuco down from doing that. And so I think that's a bit interesting that it has nothing to do with his lack of morals, because that's kind of why Mike sort of recruited him way back in season 1 to help him with his deal, is because he could tell that Jimmy or Saul had no morals and would be willing to do this con job where he spills the coffee on the cop. But Lalo, it doesn't seem so much to be that. I mean, there could be that element to it, sure, but it has more to do with Saul's ability to convince people to do things that they don't want to do, which is kind of also what a con artist does. So it kind of ties into that, but I think there is a distinction to be made there. That Lalo looks on Saul a bit differently than Mike would. But, so that's very interesting. He has this thing he wants Crazy 8. He has an idea in mind for Crazy 8 that doesn't involve shanking him, and he needs Saul's help to do it because he needs to have a lawyer involved, and he doesn't want any involvement whatsoever. And I love how the episode disseminates this, because they cut the scene. They don't tell us what Lalo's plan is. They just show him handing a piece of paper. We don't know what that is. And then we see Saul with Crazy 8, and we still don't know exactly what's going on at first. We know something's up, but then they slowly disseminate when Crazy 8 says, I'll confess, and he starts confessing, and then Saul puts on the show and dance for Hank, which I'll get to shortly. And that was great. I love the way that they didn't tell us up front, but then by the time Crazy 8 starts saying, oh, I'll tell you when the drops is, it's pretty obvious to everyone that that this is Lalo's plan to get back at Gus. Which, I love the way they just, and of course you knew Lalo was up to something, and it probably, it's pretty obvious that he has an axe to grind against Gus, so it wasn't probably maybe too hard to guess that what he was up to was trying to get back at Gus somehow, and that's why he didn't want to shank Crazy 8, not because he's a good guy, but because he saw an opportunity to get at Gus, which is very interesting. So Hank, we saw this from the previews, that from the trailers, that he would be in this season, which I actually kind of wish they didn't show me that, so I could be, oh my god, it's Hank and Gomez, but it was still great seeing them again. It felt like, and because this is like old Hank before season 1 of Breaking Bad, because Hank had a story arc in itself, where he did a lot of character growth, but in the first season he was kind of a sleazy, asshole type guy, so they went back to that. It was interesting seeing that sort of the jokey relationship he has with Gomez. And when he mentioned Marie, that just made me think, oh my god, this is really getting the Breaking Bad territory, because Marie is kind of like a deep cut. Because Better Call Saul, you see random characters from Breaking Bad all the time, but usually nothing to do with the core family, like Walt, Jesse, Skyler, Walt Jr., and Marie. But now we finally get Hank, and we're getting more into that sort of core base. I don't know. I just thought it was great. I absolutely, it was just a huge nostalgia trip. And I wouldn't just call it fan service, because of course it ties perfectly into the storyline. But we can, because we watch Breaking Bad, we kind of know where the show can't go, because we know that in Breaking Bad, Hank isn't aware that Gus is a drug dealer. He has to slowly figure this out. And when he does figure it out, nobody believes him. They think he's crazy. So, from that, we know that Lalo's plan will not work. Because nobody suspects Gus of anything. Unless, of course, it's some character that we hadn't seen in Breaking Bad who Gus has killed before he can tell anyone about it, but that's just guessing. Ultimately, we know that Hank and the DEA and the law enforcement in general will not learn anything about Gus because, as I said, we remember that they thought Hank was crazy for even implicating Gus. So Gus will remain clean. We do know that much, but we don't know exactly how. So this is all fascinating stuff. Now anyway, I'm going to stay with Saul, but I'm going to switch gears here to talk about Kim. Because their stories are kind of intertwined this episode as well. Now, Kim's storyline is kind of interesting because she's all excited at first. Again, we see this kind of dying relationship that she has with Saul when she's sitting out on the balcony, she's sitting out on the balcony drinking beer and Saul comes home. And I love actually the juxtaposition of the two scenes, the one at the beginning of the episode and the one at the end. And again, the one at the beginning, not to jump too far ahead, but the one at the beginning is more showing the dying relationship, where the one at the end is showing how the relationship is being ignited again. That seems to be common. I mean, there's only 3 episodes so far this season, but that seems to be common this season, and maybe the end of last season too, is where most of the time you see their relationship dying, but then you get sparks of why they're still together, and sparks that endear them to each other, and we get that at the end of the episode. And I love the juxtaposition of that. So, but anyway, at the start, Kim is really excited that she gets to do all her pro bono stuff, which obviously is where her heart is. Like, she does the Mercer Verde thing really just for money, to make a living and stuff like that, and that allows her to do the pro bono stuff, which of course does not contribute to her finances at all, but it's where her heart is. And of course this gets interrupted how the Rich from I almost forgot that she worked for him now, but he kept, calling her saying, no, you need to stop what you're doing with the pro bono stuff because this is what pays the bills and we need you. And that I love that scene. I loved how you could tell how pissed off she was, but she knew that he was right and that there was nothing she could do about it. It's just she had no choice but to abandon her clients, which is what she really wanted to do in order to do the job that pays her bills. And so we get this very interesting scene with this curmudgeon who's like, I'm not going to leave my land, blah, 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 blah. And I don't know, maybe I'm not understanding the situation entirely, but at the eventually, I love how Kim yells at him eventually. She tries to reason, be nice, and he's a total dickhead, and she's just like, well, fine, you're being unreasonable. You signed a fucking contract. You have to go buy it, and that $18,000 we offered to give you, off the table. And if you come back tomorrow, we'll give you $10,000. But in the week, we'll kick you out, and you get nothing. Now, my question is something I don't think I'm understanding, is why are they so upset that he refused to leave if legally they can kick him out and have him evicted? I suppose, it could be that it would take longer to kick him out and have him convicted, and maybe it will cost them. I don't know if it would cost them more money, but maybe it would take longer, and that would cost them more money. The delay, that would be easier for them if he chooses to go, and so that's why they're trying so hard to convince him. But if they need to, if worse comes to worse, they can kick him out. But I was thinking the whole time, why are they bothering? Why don't they just get the sheriff in right away and kick him out if they can do that, which it seems like they can, because legally he doesn't have a right to be there. But anyway, of course this is more these scenes were there more about to describe Kim's internal character journey, what she's going through. And it's obvious, if I'm going to backtrack a bit, when he yelled at her, it's obvious that that got to her. Because, you know, he pretty much had her pegged. He's saying, oh, I'm sure you go to the soup kitchens, whatever, once a year, which is, arguably, she does a lot more than that because she does the pro bono stuff, which is a lot more than just going to a soup kitchen once a year. But he kind of had her pegged that she was doing this, you know, charity work to try to make up for the guilt she feels from what she does. I don't know if it was so much what she does with Mercer Verde, but maybe also a combination of her relationship with Jimmy and how immoral that he is and the stuff she's done with him. And so he kind of had her pegged in figuring out that she does have a guilty conscience. And especially with Chuck, I talked about in season 4, they covered it that she was really guilty. She felt really guilty over what happened to Chuck, and that's when she started doing the pro bono work. So it was kind of to make up for that, because she feels like she's partly responsible for his suicide, for helping Jimmy con him, and of course she feels even worse by the fact that Jimmy doesn't seem to give a fuck about his own brother, and she cares more about that. So anyway, he did kind of have her pegged in the sense that she had a guilty conscience and she was doing charity work to try to, and I think that's what set her off, because she was pissed off that he had, and the actress is so amazing. She played this so well when he was yelling at her reaction to it. You could tell that he was really getting to her, and so she responded by yelling at him because, of course, he hit too close to home, but also she was trying to convince herself of what she was saying that was true, that this is just a curmudgeon that is in the wrong, and he's trying to convince himself he's not. But then later on, we see her driving, she stops, she turns around, and she goes back to his house. He tries to show him houses, said, let me help you, and he's like, nah, fuck off. You're just trying to manipulate me. But really she wasn't. Really, at that stage, because if she wanted him gone, she could have just left it with what she said when she yelled at him, because that was pretty devastating. She was actually trying to help him because, again, she felt guilty for yelling at him because she realized why she did it, that she acted out of anger because he hit too close to home. So that was pretty interesting. And it was also interesting, again, getting back to the scene with Saul and Kim, or Jimmy and Kim, however you want to say it. The second scene at the end of the episode on the balcony, that was really interesting because, of course, Jimmy was, or Saul, was just recruited into this cartel world, which he didn't want. He kept trying to get out of it. He's like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm unavailable, and Lalo's just like, now you can make the time. Because, again, he's very uncomfortable with this and doesn't want anything to do with this. So it's a good and a bad. It makes him feel like shit and scared, but on the other hand, he is getting a lot of money for it. So he's still kind of on the fence. We know by Breaking Bad times he has no compunction, and he's gotten over this trepidation and is all about making them the cheddar, as Jesse would say. But at this stage, this is still kind of scary to him, and so he feels like he had a horrible day. And then Kim, of course, just had her dealings with the dude. She wasn't able to do her pro bono cases, and she got called out and snapped, and so they both had sort of horrible days. And I love how they sort of connect on that level. And also, I like the callback to the first balcony scene, because the first balcony scene, this is shot very well, where there was a beer, where Saul put the empty bottle on the ledge. You could tell that Kim was very nervous about it being there. I love the way they shot it, because they kept focusing on the bottle and they kept showing how nervous Kim was, but they never addressed it. They never talked about it. And I love that, but the way it was shot made it clear that it was an ever-looming presence, even though it was never mentioned. And I love, this is amazing film. I love filmmaking, amazing cinematography when they do stuff like that. But I love the follow-up is even better when, again, he puts the bottle on the ledge and she starts to get nervous, but she's like, fuck it, and just throws it over. And then Jimmy throws his own bottle over, and they just start throwing bottles over, and it's sort of a cathartic release from, all the bad day or the sort of trauma that they both experienced that day, and they sort of connect on that level. That was amazing scene. I did really like that a lot. Now, let me move over to the Mike stuff, which I'm not that enthusiastic about this. I'm still waiting to see where they're going with this. Now, I watched this behind the scenes special where one of the writers in the show said it was a very important episode for Mike. We learned a lot about him. But I don't think that's true. Honestly, just me. Because I think this is just a continuation. Because we already knew from the previous episode that he was depressed. He's drinking himself because he's depressed over having to kill Werner. And these scenes kind of just re-emphasize that. I wouldn't go as far as to say they were totally unnecessary, but I don't think they really tell us a lot about Mike like this writer would suggest. I think they're just re-emphasizing what we already knew, which, again, not necessarily a bad thing. I particularly like the scene when he's at the bar and he's telling them to take down the postcard of Sydney. Now, I can't remember if Sydney had anything specifically to do with Werner. It's been a long time since I've seen season 4, and maybe someone who's seen it more recently or remembers it, but has a better memory, remembers exactly what the connection. But I think he mentioned something about Australia, so I don't remember. But whatever, it seemed to me that postcard reminded him of Werner. And I love how he was like yelling at the bartender. He's like, take it down now. And the bartender's like, no, fuck off. You're going to leave now. But then eventually he's like, please take it down now. And then the bartender realized that it was causing him pain. So he felt sympathy for him and took it down. That was a nice touch. I did really like that. But the scene where I saw this in the trailer and I thought it would have some meaning. Like, I didn't think it would just be some random punk set aside to attack an old man for no reason. I thought it would have something to do with the overall story. So I was actually, to be honest, a bit disappointed in that. It seems to be a cliche that he's just walking randomly down the street and some guys just start picking on him and try to rob him and he kicks their asses. I don't know. And they underestimate him because they think he's a fragile old man and he kicks their ass. This seems kind of cliche to me. I don't think it's horrible, but not a huge fan of it, let me put it that way. It doesn't seem to add much. Again, I don't think this tells us a lot about Mike. But anyway, let me move over to the Nacho stuff, which I really loved. Really loved this episode. It was great seeing him at home, and how his life is kind of hollow, and he's just sitting there with these two random chicks who obviously he doesn't really have deep feelings for. And I just watched an interview where someone made a comparison from Nacho to Jesse, because we saw Jesse in the later seasons of Breaking Bad. It was also, he was rich and he had a huge house and all this stuff and people hanging around, but it was empty. He felt hollow. And it seems to be the same way with Nacho. Maybe not to that degree, but Nacho does seem to feel, with Nacho is more of, he's afraid of his family, he's afraid of the situation he has more things to worry about, and so, he tries to seek comfort in these creature comforts, but it doesn't really do anything for him. And I do like the scene where that one chick keeps fidgeting with stuff and ripping stuff apart, and she wants to rip apart the remote, and Nacho has to take it away from her and gives her a puzzle instead, because I don't know much about meth or or these hard drugs for that matter, but I remember hearing something about how it causes people to become a bit OCD and a bit wanting to chronically clean and tear stuff apart. And so it's interesting. So first of all, it shows that they are on drugs, and that's why they're around him, because he provides the drugs. And plus they make it clear that he doesn't do any himself. He just provides it for them. But also how he kind of knew what to do. Like he had a puzzle on hand because he knew it was the right thing to do to preoccupy someone who has that fidgety urge, who wants to rip things apart, and it's a way to keep her busy without destroying all of his household items. So I thought that was a nice touch. But then, of course, we have the father come over, which I wasn't expecting. Now, this is an interesting scene. First of all, I do have to call out a continuity thing. I'm sure there's some excuses people have. No, actually, it works, but I don't know. It kind of rubbed me the wrong way that he speaks English. Because we saw in the earlier season that when Mike came to the shop, Nacho had to translate that he couldn't understand English. Now it does kind of make sense. He owned the shop for what they say 11 years in Albuquerque. Now, granted, there are a lot of Spanish-speaking people in Albuquerque, but it's still in the United States, so you still think he would pick up some English in order to communicate, especially if you worked a shop and he constantly had, you would assume some customers who didn't speak Spanish, that he would pick up some English. So it does make sense in this episode standalone that he would know a little bit of English, but it's inconsistent. Before, he didn't seem to know any English. Nacho had to translate everything that he said. I mean, maybe, I don't know what the time frame in between this episode and that, maybe it's a couple of years, so maybe he picked up a bit of English in that time frame, but I don't know. It's a nitpicky thing, but it's rubbing me the wrong way. But anyway, because he does speak English to the other girls that are there, saying, "Oh, pleased to meet you," and stuff like that. But it starts out with him saying, "Oh, this house is pretty big. This stuff is pretty new." And I love this sort of implied undercurrent there is, where the fuck did you get all this money? I know where you get this money from. You're a criminal, and I hate it. And that was I love the subtleties that this show sort of has in there, and that was a really nice touch. And I love how the conversation after, even when he's saying that, he's still not being outwardly hostile, even though that undercurrent is definitely there, and I'm sure Nacho detects it. But from there, the conversation is really, lovely, polite. "Oh, I got this offer in my shop. It was a pretty good offer. He offered me more money than it was worth. And what do you think I should do?" "Oh, I think you should take it, retire early." And then it turns into, "I know this is coming from you. I know you're trying to do this. I know you're behind this. I'm not going to fucking let you do it. I don't want your dirty money. Leave me alone." And that was amazing. Now, when I first watched this scene, I thought that Nacho wasn't responsible for this, because he did seem to play it that way. And when he said he had nothing to do with it, I actually believed him. The father didn't. He was like, "No, go ahead, deny it. I know you're full of shit." But the more I thought about it, of course Nacho was behind this, because Gus is threatening to kill him, and he wants to keep his father safe. And of course his father doesn't know this, and that's why he's so resistant. Of course he can't tell him about it, and of course the father's just like, "Go to the police," not realizing that Nacho can't go to the police, because if he does, then his father's dead. So it's the situation's a lot more complex than his father is aware of, which is very interesting. And in fact, again, I watched this interview with the actor who plays Nacho, and he confirmed that Nacho was in fact behind trying to sell his father. And he also said, it's interesting, I didn't really pick up on this, that he actually wants to run away with his father. Like, that Nacho wants to run away and try to escape, but of course he can't do that if his father is still behind, because they'll kill him. So he wants to run away with his father, and so he wants to remove his attachment to the store so they can run away together, which is really interesting. But here's the thing, and I totally buy that Nacho would feel this way, but here's the thing. We know that Nacho is wrong because unless they completely disappear and maybe go to Robert Forster's character or something and get a different name change, Gus will find him, and Gus will kill them because he has a certain set of skills. But you know that Gus's reach is international. And so, unless Nacho is really good at hiding, Gus would be able to find and kill him and his father. So I think Nacho's kind of a bit naive by thinking he could run away from Gus. But it was still very interesting. And again, I love how that scene with Nacho and Saul at the end, where Saul's like, all right, who the fuck did I just set up? I don't want to be a part of this. Nacho's like, you're a part of this. You just have to deal with it. It doesn't matter what you want. And I love that because it was kind of him relating his own personal predicament, just like he is. He doesn't want to be involved in any of this either, but he is, and he just has to deal with it, and he's just relating that to Saul as well, which I love. And it was also great getting this scene with Nacho and Gus, because, of course, Nacho is Gus's secret informant, and so he tells him all about Lalo's plan, but he's like, if you change the drop points and the police don't find it, then they'll know that someone snitched. And so Gus is like, fine, we'll leave the drop points because it's more important to Gus that Nacho's more important as an informant than that money. He's willing to give up the money because he has a direct line to Lalo, which is a lot more important to him, so he doesn't want to burn Gus. And that shows how intelligent Gus is, because I think a lot of shows will have a criminal will be like, no, fuck you, I'm going to burn you. And that would be like to show that they're the typical evil bad guy, which is cliches I don't like. And I love that the show's different, and it shows how intelligent and just how much of a mastermind Gus is, that he can see what's more important, and that he's willing to let the money go because his hotline into Lalo is a lot more important to him. So that was really good stuff. But as I said, we do know that Lalo's plan will not work, because we know that Gus does not get caught by the DEA. So Gus obviously is going to think of something else in order to get out of this, to avoid suspicion. And this is kind of typical of Gus. We've seen this earlier, how he got caught red-handed by Lalo, but he invented this story about, the Germans were just there to create a new cooler, blah, blah, blah. A refrigerator system for my chicken. So it's obvious to me, anyway, that he's going to spin this somehow and able to escape getting caught. And this will sort of turn up the heat. Now, I want to talk a bit about the mention of Breaking Bad, because I went back and watched this scene. It's the first scene one of the first scenes Saul appeared in Breaking Bad, and of course a lot of people talked about this, but I talked about this before. It's very well known by this stage. We're 5 seasons into Better Call Saul, that the scene in Breaking Bad where Jesse and Walt tie up Saul, take him out to the desert and threaten to kill him. He doesn't know who they are, and he assumes they're the cartel. And he says, it wasn't me, it was Ignacio. And then he says, Lalo didn't send you. And of course, we got into this last season when they first introduced Lalo, that this is the person we're talking about. But I always forget what exactly, but that's the gist. And it's really fascinating that they created an entire storyline, an entire show, just that one throwaway line of dialogue that was never mentioned in Breaking Bad ever again. But we can sort of see the end point of where this is leading to, that Nacho will do something that the cartels would want to kill him for, and that Saul would believe that he would take the blame for, and that he's terrified. And this kind of ties into how terrified Saul is of the cartel, even though in Breaking Bad he doesn't seem to be that scared. But in this one scene, it shows that he kind of is. That he did something that he knew if the cartel ever found out what he did, they would kill him for it. But obviously the cartel doesn't ever find out what he did. So what is it that he did? And was it really Nacho, or was it him and Nacho together that did this thing that they did? But what's also I find interesting is that he says, "Did Lalo send you?" Which implies to me that Lalo's still alive, yet we never saw him in Breaking Bad at all. So either he just wasn't that important and went off in the desert and did nothing, or maybe he is dead and Saul's just not aware of it. I think this is something that Better Call Saul might address. I'm still hoping that in season 6 they will actually get caught up to Breaking Bad times and show us like the other perspective of what was going on when Saul was off screen. I think that would be amazing, but I still don't like originally. That was my original thought that they would do this. Like if you watch some of these videos I recorded in season 1, I was saying, oh, the first 2 seasons are going to be about, Saul becoming Jimmy McGill becoming Saul Goodman. Season 3 is going to catch up to like Breaking Bad times and shows what was happening in the other time, and then season 4 and 5 will shows what happened after Breaking Bad. Yeah, I was totally wrong, completely wrong, because there's some interviews were saying that the show wasn't a prequel, so I was basing it off of that. But it turns out, for the most part, it is. I mean, you have the Gene scenes, and I think that's what the interview was referring to. It's not entirely a prequel because you have those Gene scenes, but really, the Gene scenes is just a 5-10 minute sequence once a year at the start of the season. The rest of the show is a prequel, so I don't know if we ever will. I think there is a strong possibility that we will get caught up to Breaking Bad times, and then they're going to skip right back ahead to the Gene scenes and just assume, well, you know what happens from here because you've seen Breaking Bad. It's going to be really interesting how season 6 handles this. I'm really curious. I still hope that they'll do a show like the other perspective of what was going on during Breaking Bad times, but we'll see, because they would have to sort of jump through time rather quickly, which is something this show has not really done so far. I mean, there have been a few time skips and time jumps here and there, but for the most part, again, really slow burn. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see where this is going, and I'm very curious. As I said, the most frustrating thing about this is watching it week to week, where I have to wait a whole another week to get the next piece in the puzzle, which I'm so wanting to see. Anyway, my rating for what's this called again? This is the guy? Yeah, no, the guy for this, sorry. My rating for the guy for this out of 10 is a 7, very good. It's a very good episode. As I said, some of the intricacies, the involvement with Kim's character and Nacho's character was quite great. But then the Mike storyline, I wasn't as big of a fan of the opening scene with the ants. I think it was a waste of time. And yeah, the episode just maybe didn't go as far as I was hoping, but it's kind of typical for an episode 3 of Better Call Saul. Anyway, that is it for my review of Better Call Saul Season 5, Episode 3. I will be back next week to review the next episode of Better Call Saul, so be sure to check that out. Also, check out my channel for many more reviews on other shows like Star Trek, Picard, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.